ISAS, and to which some of the leading commentators from Bangladesh and India have contributed. VIF is very happy to join ISAS for this book discussion, and I want to thank Professor Rajamohan for organizing this. I also want to welcome all the friends who are here, and I can see many of them, but some of them I may not be able to see because this Google, you don't really see all the faces, but I can see Majid Tariq Karim, I can see Shamsher Chaudhary ji, I can see Narayan Saab. Well, I can also see some Anil Wadhwa is there, I can see him, and Mustafizur Rahman ji, I can see, and some I can't recognize. Shekhar Sinha ji, I can see. So, welcome to this discussion, and we are looking forward to a discussion on Bangladesh and Bangladesh's great achievement, which has been mentioned in this book, this dual transition that everyone has been talking about. Bangladesh is now transitioning to becoming a developing country from a less developing country, and also a middle-income country. And I think this is a great achievement, and people in India would be very happy to see Bangladesh doing so well. It's maintained a consistently high economic growth rate. Socioeconomic indicators are doing extremely well. And I think Bangladesh, in many ways, is a poster boy for developing countries. And hence, people of Bangladesh, its government, they deserve congratulations. I think that apart, but it is important to understand how Bangladesh managed to accomplish this miracle, great achievement. This is something that the authors have discussed in the book, and I'm sure there will be some discussion about this today as well. This is also a time when COVID has struck the world and also impacted the world very badly. In India, we are seeing first quarter growth dropping by nearly 24%. So what happens in the future, because COVID is going to stay here, what happens in the future, that has created a huge uncertainty. I'm sure Bangladesh will also is feeling that. And I think just before COVID struck, Bangladesh, the NEC approved a perspective plan for Bangladesh becoming a developed country by 2041, and anticipating a growth rate of about almost 9% by 2041, 9% by 2030, bringing the poverty down to 3% by 2041. I think these are very ambitious targets, though they are very desirable. And even this year's budget, I think there was a lot of discussion in the Bangladeshi newspapers about whether the budget has been ambitious, particularly it has been particularly on the revenue front. And I think this book was written mostly before the COVID-19 struck. So maybe some assumptions may have to be re-examined. But I think the essays in the book, they are very objective. And by noting that Bangladesh has achieved achieved on many fronts, but they straight go into the discussion about the challenges and what impact it is going to have on Bangladesh itself. The transition is not going to be easy, because Bangladesh will lose many of the incentives and privileges that it was getting on the export front, particularly on the RMG export front. So the loans will become more expensive, etc. So I think all these challenges are very nicely captured in the various articles that are there in the book. And each article is an excellent summary of that particular sector. So the financial sector has been analyzed, the NGO sector has been analyzed, And on the political front, the issue of terrorism and radicalization, I think there's a wonderful chapter there. So there are many challenges which Bangladesh will be facing, and hence I think there will be a need to constantly look at the fresh challenges like the COVID-19, etc., and its impact. This could impact some of the planning which is already underway in Bangladesh. But I think the role of the NGO sector, the role of the civil society, and how it compares with the role of the government, I think that has come out very well, and that distinguishes Bangladesh and its economic model very much from many other countries like from India. So I think there are some lessons and something to be discussed and learnt on that. So, with these words, I think this is a model for, I think, more such books to come out on South Asian countries, whether it is Nepal, Sri Lanka, Maldives, and others, because the some of the top, the leading authors have written and taken a very objective and a scholarly view of things, and brought out a lot of information, but as well as analysis. So I want to once again congratulate the ISAS and Raja Mohan and all the authors for coming out with a wonderful book. I'm sure it will be a reference book, and we'll be referring to it because it has a lot of very good information and analysis. With those words, thank you very much for joining us again, and I now request Professor Rajamohan to say a few words.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. Let me join Dr. Arvind Gupta in welcoming all of you for this morning or afternoon's session on this book. It's wonderful to see so many friends from Delhi, Dhaka, and many other places, including those from the Vivekananda International Foundation. Thank you, Arvind, for agreeing to collaborate with us, because we're really very pleased. ISAS is very pleased to have supported this project, which has produced this book. I want to especially congratulate Dr. Narayan and Dr. Sri Radha Datta for taking this initiative and bringing together a stellar set of scholars, and most of them are from Bangladesh. We had the great pleasure of hosting them at ISAS in Singapore. We were really hoping we could draw people together to Singapore. Unfortunately, the current situation has prevented that. But hopefully, that this is just the beginning of our engagement with scholars from Bangladesh, and hopefully the next book, we'll be able to do it properly, physically, both in Delhi and in Dhaka, as well as in Singapore. I just want to say a word about ISAS. I'm sure not all of you are familiar with it. The Institute for South Asian Studies is part of the National University of Singapore system. It was set up in 2004 with the mandate to study contemporary South Asia. So we look at politics, economics, international relations, security, and a bit of work on diaspora, and increasingly on the technology policy issues in the subcontinent. I think one of my own missions since I joined here 2 years ago has been to make people aware that, look, South Asia is not India and Pakistan, that there is more to South Asia than India and Pakistan, because the kind of funding logic especially from our friends in the United States and the rest, and the international interest in the nuclear issue, the last 30 years have seen obsessive focus on the nuclear related issues, stability, instability. In the process, actually neglecting to study historic, I think, what could be consequential developments in the region. And I think for that, to understand this region far better, we hope to devote a lot more attention to, I'm not saying smaller, I'm not saying smaller neighbors, but nobody is small in South Asia. Bangladesh is one of the largest countries, to look at all the countries in South Asia, each on its own merit, rather than looking at through the prism of India, through the prism of the rest of the world, which doesn't pay enough attention, to examine these countries each on their own merit. And because all of them, in their own way, I think every single country in South Asia, because of their location, is becoming more important geopolitically, thanks to the global transformations that are taking place. And I think everyone would benefit by looking at each of these countries on their own steam and how they're transforming. Arvind talked about, another book. I mean, in fact, we're hoping in the next month or two, one of the books we did, volume we're doing on maritime Sri Lanka. Looking at Sri Lanka's maritime identity through history and how that has become important. Hopefully that book will be out soon. But that's for another day. But at this point, I really want to also thank all the authors from Bangladesh who came to ISAS. I also want to thank Professor Rahman Soban for agreeing to give us this, give his reflection after the two authors speak. We really, all of us are great fans of Dr. Rahman, of course, and it's wonderful to have him speak on this occasion. I'm not an expert on Bangladesh, but I've had great fascination for the country because I think over the last 30 years, I've had opportunity to travel and see its growing importance. I think one of the important things that Dr. Soban mentions in the book, that Bangladesh today is the second largest economy in the subcontinent. That it has overtaken Pakistan in most respects, and of course, even on human indicators, even India. But I think the change in the size of Bangladesh economy because of the high growth rates will have interesting consequences to how this region is going to evolve, particularly the eastern subcontinent is going to evolve. That in turn, I think, has huge consequences for how we think about regionalism, how we think about the future. Second, I think many Pakistanis themselves have begun to debate about the Bangladesh model. In fact, two Pakistani economists at Yale University have had this to and fro. And what is it that Bangladesh has done right and what Pakistan could not do? So I think it's and it's not just for Pakistan. I think for much of the world, developing world, the transformation of Bangladesh in the last few years, I think is an important subject. And we are really glad that we have contributed to this in a small way. So I would stop here and again thank all of you for supporting us, and we look forward to doing more with the VIF, with others, friends in Dhaka, on Bangladesh and Bangladesh related issues. So now I'll call the two authors to introduce the book, and then we'll have Dr. Soban to reflect on the volume. So Dr. Narayan.
Go first. Yeah. Can Dr. Sriradha go first, and she'll introduce all the authors, and then I'll follow.
Okay. Sriradha, floor is yours.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Gupta and Dr. Rajamohan. It's true that the 50 years of Bangladesh is really a remarkable history, and this book, in fact, tries to capture that particular point where it began on a deep struggle and the heights of liberation war. But as we all understand, the struggle did not quite end there, and Bangladesh overcame very difficult circumstances, and I would think very humble beginnings to now pause exactly where both of you referred to, at a very strong position, being coveted not only by its neighbors but also every single major power, from a beginning of lower than 1% GDP to now consistently having recorded 6% GDP, and that too through very turbulent political times. I think this was no means achievement. And of course, as we all understand, that the economic achievements of Bangladesh did not happen overnight, and nor was it accidental. I mean, there were a lot of issues that actually have, and I think the book is an attempt to unravel that. And for many of you who've not had an opportunity to read the book, I'm hoping that this discussion will generate enough enthusiasm for you to go back to that bookshelf and look for it. We've also seen how aid has flowed in, and the market access of Bangladesh, which opened up the economy so well. But on the other hand, I think a lot has to be said about the individual entrepreneurship, which we've seen very evident in Bangladesh of all the neighbors. And I think that is a part of the trajectory and a part of the success story of these 50 years. While all of us are, I think, closely following this journey, all the authors here, but I think interestingly for many of the authors, part of this book is, it's story also about their personal journey that was unfolding at a larger landscape within that nation building exercise that Bangladesh was taking. This book is really, a fascinating story, I would say, of all that's happened from the economic point of view, the financial sectors, as well as the political processes, and many other issues that every nation has to grapple with. Let me not speak more. We are all here. What I'll do is let me start beginning to introduce some of the authors. Many of them are here with us. I can see one or two authors messaging me that they're not able to log in. But let me just begin in the order of the way the book has been done. The first chapter is by Professor. Of course, before I start that, and I know we are going to hear from Professor Rehman Shoban, who's written this absolutely brilliant forward, and we are all so grateful for him. And I think, as Professor Raja said, we're all absolute fans of Professor Shoban, and it's a very privilege for us that he was part of this exercise that he undertook. So, let me just start by introducing Mustafiz Rahman, who actually, if you can, I don't know whether you'll be able to be visible here, who starts the first chapter about Bangladesh, the dual graduation, where, from LDC to the middle income country. Also, I mean, while certainly takes us through that whole journey as to where and how Bangladesh, from the very, very humble modest beginning, could, come itself there. In fact, of course, COVID has brought in certain uncertainties, but just before COVID, World Bank, in fact, had a, study which says that Bangladesh is going to be, I think, the first top 8 economies of the world, which is certainly a very, very significant achievement for Bangladesh. He, however, also, highlights the challenges that lies ahead. I mean, as a low income, as a LDC, the kind of privileges and accesses it had to the market, which is now going to be something that they're going to be grappling with. So that's something that Mustafiz Rahman, again, as part of his expertise, has brought it out brilliantly on in his first introductory chapter. In fact, flowing right from that chapter, we come to the second chapter, which is by one of our ISAS scholars, Dr. Amitendu Palit, and I can see him. He's here. But I'm sorry, I'm not sure we'll be able to, see him visually, but I can see he's there. He, of course, talks about the Bangladesh's future export challenges and the need for an FTA strategy. He, again, I mean, this whole travel of going through this, from moving into the LDCs to a developing country economy to a middle income country. But again, he says that there is a lot of work to be done. It's a work in progress, and there are many decisions that Bangladesh now needs to take in terms of strategizing how it's going to increase its the FTA, because I think that's, he says, is intrinsic to the growth story that Bangladesh has, and it can't stop there, because given the fact that now, having graduated very soon, it's going to, as has been mentioned in the earlier chapter. So he's actually brought in these, of course, extremely succinct way, that way Amitandu Palit always writes in. Flowing in front from there is Dr. Salim Rehan's chapter on, where he focuses on the fabulous growth story of the RMG. We all know how ready-made garment industry has been a core industry of Bangladesh, has really taken it to where it is. It replaced the earlier well-known industry of jute, has been this, of course. And again, Salim has pointed out also the problems there. While we, some of it has been there in the media domain, there has been a lot of discussions about how. But again, the point that I made about the entrepreneur spirit that Bangladesh has, I think that is so evident and so much part of this absolutely beautiful journey which has happened on the ready-made garment, and the way that they've been able to, make itself relevant in the world export space. Flowing from that is the next chapter, and I know Dr. Naran is going to get into more details about this. This is his chapter on the role of multilateral agencies and NGOs in the development of Bangladesh. I think this is, again, a core issue, and he will explain this brilliantly in his own inimitable style as to how that has actually, propelled Bangladesh to where it right now stands. So I'm not going to delve too much into it, and I know he will take this over from there. The next chapter, which is about the policy stances of the financial sector development in Bangladesh. Salahuddin Ahmed, unfortunately, I'm not sure he's able to log in. He had some issues, but he again talks about how this has been a, while Bangladesh sector consists of course, not only the Bangladesh central banks, their, the state-owned commercial banks, the specialized banks, the non-scheduled banks, the foreign banks and the non-banking financial institutions, as well as the commercial banks, and of course the insurance companies, the microfinancing, again, a huge growth story about the microfinance institutions, and the capital market. All of this he weaves into this absolutely wonderful outlay of the way he presents the chapter, but again, ends on a very, very cautionary note, saying that there has to be, there's a free flow of things that's happened, but there has to be far more structural policy reforms taken in to ensure that Bangladesh can, keep on with this growth journey that we've been able to. Moving on from the financial sector, we move on to the political chapters, and the sixth chapter has been written by me on the complex politico-social fabric, and if possible, we'll delve into it later. But flowing from that, in fact, and I thought it kind of woven in beautifully, was a chapter by Professor Amina Mohsen. She's here. Yes, she is here. Who talks about the women development and empowerment, and I think a point that all of us constantly make about how Bangladesh's HDI indicators, including about its, girl child enrollment, health, women health, they've absolutely done wonders. I mean, some of the indicators are best in the South Asian and if not elsewhere. But despite that, and again, in her inimitable style, Amina talks about how it's a really a work in progress. While much has been done, and the fact that it's a country which has been ruled by, women leaders for and so strongly, but at the same time, representation both at the legal, at the political level, but also even socially, legally, there is so much more work to be done. And she, I think, has very brilliantly woven that in her chapter. The next chapter is by Amit Ranjan and Roshni Kapoor, again, ISAS scholars. I think Dr. Amit is here, who talks about the militancy in Bangladesh. And at the very outset, again, a point that Dr. Gupta made, that it's really critical, and it's been an issue that's been flagged everywhere. And I think we need to understand this in the depth that it's really. And he's of course very beautifully distinguished between terrorism and militancy, and he's focused here on militancy and how he talks about the internal struggle that the country's had over this. And while he's also referred to the fact that there are several counter militancy measures that's been undertaken, de-radical programs been undertaken, and certainly Bangladesh has had been able to, especially in the aftermath of the Holy Bakery artisan case, that they've been able to roll. But at the same time, the fact, again, then we bring back to this whole syncretic Islam, and then the top-down approach of Islam, which is done by the military leaders, how that continues to weave its spell in Bangladesh, how it's so difficult, despite the fact that you're not able to disconnect, and how leaders are grappling with this dual thing, where you also need to work with Islam groups, political parties and else, and we've seen this particular government, previous governments, but on the other hand, also, rein in the militancy factor. And again, I think a brilliant chapter. The other chapter, of course, again, I hope Dr. Narayan and the co-author, Mr. Sareen Barak Khatun, is going to talk about this, on the energy and development, a very, very critical sector. Much of Bangladesh's achievement is going to be weighed in as to how they can manage that sector. As of now, they haven't done, too well. Sheikh Hasina, in fact, has been able to undertake a few reforms, but I think, as the authors argue, that that's not enough. I also know at a bilateral level, India and Bangladesh is closely working on the energy sector, and I think that's something, again, India hopefully will be able to work more and deliver more, which is something, again, that was one of the first takeaways that happened actually after 2010 framework of cooperation agreement. But this is again a very critical chapter, and Dr. Narayan hopefully will speak on this at a little more details. Then the next chapter, of course, is again something which is core to all of us, is a chapter on the Indo-Bangladesh bilateral relation, penned by former Ambassador, Foreign Secretary Shamsher Chaudhary, who's here with us. And I hope all the authors will get few minutes during the Q&A answer to actually, examine the issue. And he's really given us a fresh look, and he actually closes it on a very positive. And he talks about the perception issue, where it has, despite the kind of close cooperative development that's taking place with the two neighbors. There is misgivings on both sides, and he's delved into that fairly, with great details. But again, what I enjoyed really most of the chapter that he actually finishes off on a very upbeat mood, and I think all of us share that particular, despite what we see often. And I know the latest fracas over onions has not left a very good mood. The Bangladeshi media seems very, very taken in with that, and I do understand where that comes from. But the point is that both the neighbors are working very closely, and I think we hope to hear about that. The last chapter, I think, is yes, the last chapter is again on Bangladesh's foreign policy, and I think that's one of the remarkable positions that Bangladesh has done, as I said, for a country who was really struggled from his very, very humble beginnings to now come to a position where they are, poised at a place where they're able to enable themselves, and with not only the region but the outer region, and the kind of relevance that Bangladesh has to the world global politics now is something, again, a huge, I would say, a depth of the way Bangladesh has been able to carry itself to the last 50 years. I'm going to close here, and I'm going to hand over to Dr. Narayan for greater details of the book. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sri Radha. That's a very good summary of all the chapters. The interest in Bangladesh really started because it's such an unusual development story. 50 years back, when the country gained independence, I think one of the important things which happened there was that all the institutions were in decay. The civil service, the financial sector, and all the institutions were in decay. And yet, even in the first 10 to 15 years, they got together a series of programs which they continued irrespective of political changes and irrespective of, I would say, changes in regime, and which have really sparked off a development story which is certainly very unusual, which has been very unusual in South Asia. And I'll just mention a few. The first, of course, I'll tell you is that the population program. In fact, the fertility rate has dropped from about, I would say, close to 6 to about 1.5, 1.6 numbers now, which means that there has been a great acceptance of the population program without any sound or noise about its of coercion or any feeling of a heavy hand of the government or anything like that. This has happened because entirely out of a cooperative effort by a large number of agencies, including multilateral agencies. The story of the NGOs is again absolutely unique, because the kind of NGOs that came about in Bangladesh, the BRAC as well as the Grameen Bank and several others, Proshika and several others, set an example which enabled the rural poverty to be addressed directly by their efforts, and which also means that therefore there was a lot of encouragement by the institutions, by the government, by the politicians, by the people in power to enable this to happen. And you had wonderful leaders of these institutions at that time who had, I would say, a kind of a national perspective, which enabled these institutions to grow and prosper and become really international and global institutions, leading to even the Nobel Prize being awarded to the head of the Grameen Bank. So, why is this story interesting? Because it could have happened in any of the other South Asian countries, but did not. And it happened primarily because there was a trust that the government placed in the ability of these institutions, which are outside government, to do a certain development task, which they felt that at that particular point of time in their development, they were not yet equipped to do. So the ceding of space by the government and the policymakers to people who they trusted would be able to do that more comprehensively is a single hallmark of the development story, which appears again and again and again as we go through it. And by and large, barring, I would say, some aberrations, this trust has been absolutely fulfilled. by these agencies. I think that is a kind of story that we want to convey here. Of course, there are challenges, and there are challenges which have been identified. The challenges due to growing out of all the concessions that are being given by the as a least developed country, the challenges to exports, the challenges of certainly of religion, the challenges of militancy, and certainly the challenges of energy. Energy is a very important challenge because as Bangladesh grows now, and it's really, if it's going to grow uh, to or a high income level by 2030 or 2040, energy requirements will double, triple. But there is not yet a comprehension of how this energy demand is met because it's a coal importing country, it's an oil importing country, it's a natural gas importing country. So where is it going to get all the energies, and where is it going to get all the investment to make this energy deliverable to the people of the republic? I think this is going to be a very big challenge which is not yet been adequately addressed. The last thing I want to say is that there's a lot of credit to the management of the monetary system in the sense that the currency has been stable, inflation has been reasonably balanced for the last 30 to 40 years, remittances have been substantial, and the currency stability, in fact, the kind of volatility that we have seen in the rupees, in the currencies of other South Asian countries, has by and large sidestepped Bangladesh, where you see a uniform, balanced exchange rate happening over a long periods of time with a uniform inflation rate. It's a great credit there. So I would say that yes, we have attempted to point out that okay, this is an unusual story. The question is whether it can be replicated in other South Asian countries. I doubt, because very special circumstances prevailed in Bangladesh. And I would also say that, but at the same time, there are a lot of challenges ahead. And with that, I think I would stop my intervention at this stage and maybe come back if there are further questions. Thank you, Srirada. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Srirada. Thank you, Dr. Narayan. I think we'll now go to Professor Subhan, who will speak for about 15 odd minutes, and then we'll have Srirada will kind of conduct a, bring in the other authors to the volume to discuss this. I must also apologize at this stage because we have a clash with the Sri Lankan event. So I listened to Dr. Subhan and then I'll step out for the other event that I'm hosting with the Sri Lankan Foreign Secretary. So Dr. Subhan, the floor is yours, and maybe you can speak for about 15 minutes. So that will be wonderful.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Right. Thank you very much. I had in my forward complimented the authors on, in fact, being the first to take off on bringing out a volume commemorating the 50th anniversary of Bangladesh. I think it is very appropriate that this conversation should be started and other volumes will follow. I had used as my point of departure in the opening remarks of my forward the fact that I had participated in a similar conversation built around a volume edited by Professor Raunak Jahan at Columbia University for the Southern Asian Institute, where we were reviewing the state of Bangladesh on its 25th anniversary. And it makes very interesting reading if, in fact, you actually compare the trajectory of the Bangladesh narrative over the course of these 25 years. What would be interesting is that if you looked at the identification of the economic issues, there was an excellent set of papers in the 25 years ago by Dr. A.R. Khan on the economy and Binayok Sen on the state of poverty, which indicated moderate success in the area of economic growth, and in fact, some progress in the reduction of poverty, but actually nothing very spectacular to actually take notice of. Now, the significant point of departure over the next 25 years has been the considerable acceleration in the growth rate, accelerating to far higher levels than had been even positively projected in those earlier years, and even greater achievements in the actual reduction of both absolute poverty and extreme poverty. In particularly over the course of the last decade, where we have been growing at rates of 6 to 8%. I mean, there's always some debate over the nature of growth statistics, but generally you would be quite safe in putting it in the range of 6 to 8%, which of course has in fact taken our per capita income ahead of Pakistan. We used to have the great debates in the Pakistan period and validation of the Bangladesh case against Pakistan of the wide disparity in per capita incomes between East and West Pakistan. The fact now that by the time we reach our 50th anniversary, we have a higher per capita income reflects the singular achievement that we have achieved over here, and in particular in comparison to Pakistan. Even more positive to that has been very significant declines in levels of poverty and extreme poverty, which in some numbers has been brought down to almost about 10%, which is really quite an impressive figure. Now, all these numbers, both growth and poverty reduction, have in fact come under some challenge because of the COVID crisis. And also, this points to the fragility both of the growth process and also of the precarious and vulnerable lives which people who are living around the poverty line face, where sudden shocks can in fact drive you below that line, so that you need a much more stable and diversified and more egalitarian growth strategy to in fact actually enable us to transcend such crises. The other significant and positive achievements have been the very positive developments in the areas of human development and gender empowerment. In fact, here some of our numbers are even better than India's, which again is very significant. In fact, Professor Amartya Sen has been one of the great advocates of the Bangladesh success story, pointing out its comparative successes. Now, I will very briefly try to, in fact, interpret this process, because the developmental success story has, of course, been built around considerable changes in export growth. The significant point of export growth is that whilst 86% of our exports are concentrated in the area of ready-made garments, which leaves us highly vulnerable, what has been made progress in these periods is that when 25 years ago you were talking about the garment contrasted focused export growth, you were really talking about ready-made garments with very low levels of value addition. Now there has been a high level of backward linkage in virtually all sectors of the garment area, much improvement in quality and movement up market, and which has therefore taken us into the second place, just behind China, though now Vietnam may have caught up on us because of their more active advance in the COVID period. This, of course, has demonstrated the high quality of entrepreneurship. At the time that Bangladesh came into existence, we had no entrepreneurial class, and this had been historically dominated either by the British or later on by the Hindus, businessmen, and much more important by the Pakistanis, who had a complete control over the economy up to 1971. And their departure created a massive vacuum which had to be filled by the state. But over a period of years, we've got very significant dynamism in the entrepreneurs, and they have now not just diversified into backward linkage, but into a whole range of industries. Never in my wildest imagination would I have visualized that Bangladesh would in fact have a significant steel industry, not just preparing iron rods, but primary steel products with capacity of 2 and 3 million tons. And that we would in fact be producing a variety of international standard steel. We would have high-rise buildings demonstrating considerably improved technology. We would be building ships. We would be having an export-oriented pharmaceutical industry. All these demonstrated immense capacity on the part of entrepreneurs. However, it isn't just the entrepreneurs who are part of the success story. It is their workers as much as the entrepreneurs. Because what the garment revolution really managed to achieve was to, in fact, bring rural women from the poorest income groups out of their homes where they had been in seclusion for millennia, and to, in fact, bring them into the urban marketplace and to make them into competitive sources of labor. Bangladesh success story is not just an entrepreneurial success story, it is a success story of women demonstrating the capacity to accept innovations and technology and to produce high productivity, which has given us global competitiveness. These same women, their sisters in the villages, have in fact responded to the microcredit revolution. While we talk of NGOs and Grameen Bank and BRAC and the success story associated with them, the relevant point is that millions of women have borrowed, made productive use of it, and have repaid their loans. So that this has in fact made the microcredit revolution a self-financing project rather than in fact an act of charity or welfare. And this demonstrated the sense of creativity and entrepreneurship of rural women. Our farmers have again been quite dynamic success stories. Unlike in India, where a lot of your farm sector is now been incorporated into the corporate sector, and you're having this big debate now going on over the extension of the corporate sector into the rural economy, bypassing the mandis. In Bangladesh, most of the growth dynamics is really originated in farmers with 2 to 5 acres of land. And they have in this period not only quadrupled food production from about 10 million tons to 40 million tons plus, but they have greatly diversified economy in the rural areas into cattle rearing, into poultry farming, into fisheries. In fact, when there was a significant deterrence in smuggling of cattle across the border, we felt this would create a great problem for protein lovers in Bangladesh, not to mention the leather industry. But what we have seen instead is a huge expansion in the livestock industry. We've also seen a very remarkable expansion in non-farm economic activities, including small and medium industries. So these have all been part of an extraordinary success story built around a range of entrepreneurial talents, to which we would add, of course, the extraordinary bunch of NGOs who have in fact served the very valuable purpose of in linking the urban educated class with the rural economy and making this into a positive gain. Now, these are all part of the positive success story. I think where we need to take this forward is to, in fact, go for a much more diversified export-oriented strategy. I think the concentration on ready-made garments is risky, particularly as the world becomes much more competitive. And here I think much more needs to be done. And this, of course, brings me to the, I think, the less flattering part of the Bangladesh narrative, which is the whole governance story. Because again, if you go back to 1996, when in fact the 25th anniversary was held. That was in fact held at a time when we were just graduating out of the era of what we called the long night of cantonment rule. We had already had one free and fair election where the BNP came to power. And then we witnessed a second free and fair election where the Awami League came to power. And we were at that time at the threshold of a new democratic era where the Awami League had in fact returned to power after 21 years in the wilderness, where the father of the nation had in fact been virtually erased from the history books because of the peculiar nature of our political culture. And this was then seen as a moment of great promise. But of course, we had already begun to see problems of making what was turning out to be a very promising two-party culture, which was meant to be one of the great achievements of a successful democracy, becoming an increasingly confrontational political culture, which in fact led then to the emergence of great dysfunctionalities in the parliamentary process, which was associated with boycotts, which was associated with the ruling party not in fact being as inclusive in its parliamentary practices as required, and made the parliament then into a much less significant instrument of accountability than we expected from a functioning two-party political system. And this process, of course, still took us through two free and fair elections up to 2009. But then by then, the whole problem of a confrontational political culture led to the repeal of a very critical constitutional provision, which had made provisions in 1996 largely through the initiative and political dynamism of the present Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina, of having elections under caretaker government of a non-partisan nature. In fact, I was a member of the first caretaker government in 1991. And to, of course, again, repeal the constitutional provision and go back to a system of elections held under an incumbent government, which has ensured that the last two elections have led to many questions being raised now about their competitiveness and their inclusivity. And this, of course, has had its consequence on the governance process, because if you have a process where you have a parliament which is in fact not fully competitive and not accountable to a strong opposition, this then leads then to a system where accountability remains poor, partisanship begins to infect the administrative processes and the judicial process. And this then has consequences on the quality of governance. As I point out, this is of great significance in the final phase of the Bangladesh growth story, because whilst our significant development dynamics have graduated us out of the ghetto of the LDCs into middle income status, and our aspirations take us much higher. To get to the next levels, you need now a much more effective quality of governance built around a really strong independent judiciary, which will in fact be able to provide credibility and attractiveness to inflows of foreign investment to the extent that we are witnessing in places like Vietnam. We would want to then see a much stronger and much more effective bureaucracy, which remains accountable at all times. We would want to see a much more accountable government, which would be accountable to the electorate and to the parties in opposition, so that in fact their acts of omission and commission would always be taken into account. These, I think, remain important elements of the narrative which actually has to follow. I think, on the whole, the Bangladesh story has held great promise, certainly in the developmental front, and compared again to the countries with whom we were held in competitive relationship, we have done exceedingly well. But the operative issue now is to, in fact, go back to our greatest strength, which was the driving force of the liberation struggle, which was a return to a functioning, accountable, democratic culture, which we believe is going to be the strength of the country in the future. And what would be significant about a functioning democracy is that it would then take us out of the emerging dominance of the political system by a business elite, which in fact has now, for all practical purposes, captured power. And in fact, you have a system now where the great majority of members of parliament classify themselves as businessmen, and who therefore are very important factors in affecting the dialogues in parliament and the accountability process and the institutions of regulation needed to graduate us into the highest levels of development. And you need a much more democratic parliament where people from a variety of classes, including the constituencies who I've identified as being part of the dynamic process of Bangladesh's developmental success story, are much more fully represented in parliament. This would lead not only then to a highly successful development story, elimination of poverty, but a much more inclusive and egalitarian society, which in fact has again been one of the problems which we have faced, the widening of social disparities and the disaccommodation of a whole constituency of highly dynamic people with enormous potential who have not been able to realize all that they can achieve because of the fact that the economic processes have been less participative and democratic than they should be. But with these words, I would say that at our 50th anniversary, Bangladesh has much to commend it. And most important, we have the potential to really rise to the skies. And in fact, if we get our act right in the areas we have identified, there is no reason why we should not bypass the success story Vietnam and really go on to, in fact, progress towards being the China of the next half of the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Soban, for that wonderful survey of the achievements as well as the challenges that confront Bangladesh. We're really grateful for you both for contributing to the volume as well as for your presentation. So I'll now call on Sriradha to take charge and to conduct the discussion. As I said, once again, I want to apologize because we had a clash of another appointment, and I'll be taking your leave and look forward to meeting all of you again the next event we do on Bangladesh. Thank you so much. Sriradha, the floor is yours.
I can't see any question in the chat box as yet, but I recall Ambassador Tariq Karim is here and he mentioned that he too. So Ambassador Tariq Karim, can I ask you to request you to intervene as you wanted to? Ambassador?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I dropped in to listen to everyone and not to speak. However, I'll just say a few words quickly. First of all, my compliments and congratulations to you and Mr. Narayan for putting together this remarkable volume, this collection of essays or tomes, and touching on such a wide range of subjects. Any anniversary in any person's or entity's life is an occasion for them to reflect, ponder, take stock, and recalibrate how they are going to move forward. And I think in a sense, we are at a similar inflection point as we are about to enter our 50th anniversary of independence. A lot of things have been said. I will just make a few quick points, not by way of criticizing or critiquing anything, but simply giving my perspective on how I see those things. Number one, the development paradox. Much has been said about that. I would say, and it has also been said that this has happened despite that we went against the grain of conventional thinking. Democracy and good governance and development, the three have to go together. But in the case of Bangladesh, the first two factors have been very spotty, but the development has happened nevertheless. And there must be something else that is driving it. And there I think we tend to forget that Bangladesh, by virtue of its geomorphological and geospatial position, the people of this land that they occupy have been essentially survivors against odds, natural calamities and man-made calamities for eons. And I think the primary quality that a survivor has to have is entrepreneurship, the ability to see that there is an obstacle in front of him which will either kill him or kill his ability to survive, and he has to overcome that obstacle. And in a sense, perhaps collectively, that has enabled us to overcome many challenges which otherwise, normally, in the theoretical and hypothetical senses in which we analyze, we might not have done. Number two, I think one of the fundamental things, and this came out very clearly, Dr. Narayanan also pointed out, the role of NGOs in the initial year. Now, let us not forget when the government first assumed power in 1970 after liberation in 71, it was a wasteland, all right? Whatever was there had been destroyed. There was no resources, nothing anywhere. And we also had about 40,000 madrasas in East Pakistan, as Pakistan had in West Pakistan. So, in a sense, there was a larger concentration and density of madrasas in this part than there was in West Pakistan. And the government, I think, probably realized, of course, there were numerous NGOs working, and among them were BRAC and Proshika to begin with, right in the beginning. Grameen came much later, several years later, actually, in 83. The microcredit was started by BRAC and Proshika and a few others, but then they realized that they were going into a second cycle of dependency themselves. Because I did a study on microcredits when I was in the US. Wherever microcredit organizations started microfinance lending, if the government cracked down on the rate of interest that they were allowed, those programs ran into or stalled or ran into severe difficulties, whether it was in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia or Philippines or Indonesia, or in India, where actually you had such institutions in very urban areas. The genius of Grameen was that it got the government of the day in 83 to pass an ordinance, adopt an ordinance, which enabled them to lock on to high interest rates. And of course, the compensation was that the loans were small and the repayment period was long and they were built in. So I think that was one of the things. And what happened was the NGOs mainstreamed women. I think in all the South Asian countries, we had similar problems, but mainstreaming women, giving them a sense of empowerment of self over their bodies, over their lives, over the size of the family they would have, of the type of quality of life they would give to the children, made the big difference. It empowered them not only economically, it empowered them socially, and more importantly, it empowered them politically. Now we have a problem. We were doing fantastically well. We reached almost 8% growth, but COVID-19 has had, it's had a global effect. But in Bangladesh, it has created what I call the new poor, we have as many people who have been pushed back into poverty as we had been able to take out in the last 2 or 3 decades. And these new poor are mostly urban poor. They are different from the old poor because they are literate, they have some degree of education, they have access to mobile phone and social media, they have access to comparable, and they have been, in a sense, deprived of the sense of self-respect and dignity. So there is a simmering going on somewhere over there. A point to add to this is that Bangladeshis or Bengalis as a whole have a remarkable threshold of tolerance of pain. But there is an ouch point in every person. You keep pricking a person with a pin, at some point he says, ouch. We as a nation have some point of ouch point, and you will also see if you study a political history, not just of Pakistan period, but much earlier, going back to the, let's say, the early 20th century or earlier, we have had outbursts of violence. When something happens which reaches a collective ouch point, people just react violently. So previously docile people who will tolerate a lot of pain inflicted, at some point that last straw on the camel's back breaks its back. The fourth point, governance. Governance depends on the strength or weaknesses of institutions. Institutions are made by men, and institutions are put together by a group of men at a certain point of time with a worldview that they believe is what should govern them forever. Now, so by the very nature, institutions are static. Human beings are not static, they're dynamic. The next generation thinks differently. 2 or 3 generations later, they have different sets of values. The mores have changed. And when the gap between the institutions set 2, 3, or 4 generations ago have not adapted to the changes in how people have moved forward, turbulence starts coming in. And you know, democracy, I hardly 10 years or less than a year ago in a seminar in the US, I was asked the question of the state of democracy in South Asia and Bangladesh. I said, probably no better or no worse than in the United States. In a sense, the United States is back to almost the Civil War situation. I used to argue in my classes I was teaching there more than a decade ago that the United States was not. It boasts that it's the most developed democracy, was not founded as a democracy, it was founded as an oligarchy. And that tussle between the oligarchic principle and the democratic principle, we see it out in the open today. Similarly, we were right tucked into the middle of the largest democracy in the world. But then we took pride in our secularism. But then now questions are raised in Bangladesh that can we remain an island of secularism in a vast ocean of majoritarianism that is surfacing? So there will be tussles now coming up, not only for us, but for everyone in the region. And identity. If you see the political development of Bangladesh, we started off by defining ourselves. We kicked the two-nation theory in the teeth and walked away from it and said, we are secular, we are hyphenated identity of Bengalis and Muslims, but our cultural identity trumps our faith-based identity. But progressively, each successive leader who came in after 75 shifted to the right. And in a sense, maybe situations in the region themselves will push us further to the right. That will happen organically. I don't think anybody is going to take a conscious decision towards that. It could happen organically. Because in a sense, we emerged after 1945 with the crash or the destruction of colonialism into what I describe as a post-colonial New Westphalian disorder. People called it the New World Order. It was a disorder in a sense. The old
Ambassador Karim, thank you very much. I'm sorry to be interrupting you, but we are just waiting also. And thank you for really summing up the core essence of the book.
Thank you, Sahil. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you. I would like to recognize some of the authors here, and if they would like to come in at this point. Mr. Salahuddin Ahmed?
Oh, thank you, Radha. I don't have much to say except I wrote the section on financial sector in Bangladesh. Now you must we all recognize the behind the development of Bangladesh, whatever success we have achieved, the financial sector has contributed a lot, especially banks and institutions. Our capital market is still a little weak. And of course, the microfinance sector is also very vibrant and they have contributed. But the challenges remain. The challenges, in fact, about the governance of the banks and financial institutions, and policy reforms which Bangladesh have taken over the years, from the private banks, then coming to financial norms, management norms. The policymakers have done fairly well, and the banks and financial institutions have responded. But despite that, because of some, I would say, interference from the political influence, administrative disturbances, or administrative muddling of the financial sector, especially with the central bank's autonomy and other things have become a little bit murky nowadays, because central bank has not been so effective as it was. I was there for about 10 years back. Central bank was quite effective, and I must say that it has gone a little bit, it has let us down, not because of central bank's fault. Similarly, there are problems in the banking sector also. In fact, I would conclude, because I've been writing again some of the future development, I'll conclude saying that in the financial sector, the professionalism must be allowed. There should not be any political consideration, nor any political influence. So what is happening? That's a very, and it is happening in all the commercial banks and financial sector. And another thing is that the reforms which we have achieved, and there are certain changes in the Banking Company Act, there are certain changes government has initiated, it has taken back again. But in fact, that's a very unfortunate thing. There have been some additions in the Banking Company Act. The family members have been, more family members have been allowed in the governing board of the bank. These are all going back. So this is really unfortunate, banking reform, Banking Companies Act, and some other things. So I would rather be, there are caveats, of course, but I'd rather wish the policymakers will have the goodwill, policymakers have the commitment. They should not interfere, and they should let the financial sector, bank sector, including the capital sector, to move forward. But what they're doing sometimes, in the name of so-called reforms, they are taking the financial sector back. And that is very unfortunate. And some of the shortcomings, I must say, have because of the wrong decisions of the policymakers. Thank you, Sashirada.
Thank you. I can see some questions on gender, and I know bilateral politics will come up. But before that, I'm glad you cautioned us about the problems that you're going to face. Professor Mustafiz, would you want to come in here? Mustafiz bhai?
Thank you, Dr. Sriyadar. This is an opportunity to say thank you to ISAS and the editors, and also my fellow writers, and Professor Rahman Sohan. Sir, thank you for your brilliant expose of the challenges that lie ahead as we go forward. I wrote a chapter on the dual graduation challenges, and I pointed out what would be the ramifications of the dual graduation. The LDC graduation will mean that we will no more have the market access that we enjoy, preferential market access as an LDC, the special patent fee, license fee benefit that we enjoy under the TRIPS waiver. So all these will not be there once we graduate. And then the middle income graduation will mean that the cost of borrowings are going up already since 2015 when we crossed that threshold. So a lot of challenges with regard to our own homework that we have to do in terms of remaining competitive and based on price, not preferential access, and also the infrastructure development and translating our comparative advantages into competitive advantage. But as Sir has also mentioned and others mentioned, that COVID has changed the scenario quite a lot. I wrote the article before the COVID pandemic. So now, obviously, if we look at Bangladesh, the poverty rate has gone up from 20% to 35% according to our estimates. The income inequality, the Gini coefficient has increased from 0.48 to 0.52. Consumption inequality has increased from 0.33 to 0.37. So all these have accentuated the journey ahead. So I'd like to conclude by saying that that COVID is a wake-up call in the sense that we should not take anything for granted. The future will not be a linear progression of the past, and we will have to really get our things together and some of the challenges that Sir has mentioned. So I think that we will have to try to do our own homework, but at the same time, the global community has also promised its SDG 17 talks of global partnership in helping the low-income countries. So we would also fight in WTO and other global fora for the support that was promised in successive UN resolutions. So it's both homework and also our fight in the global fora. And lastly, I think that regional cooperation, deepening of regional cooperation, is the next really horizon for Bangladesh to go in 21st century. And Sir has written many books on that. I think that that's the next frontier that Bangladesh will have to take advantage of. So with those words, I'd like to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you for getting into a little more details than we could in the initial time. I can see Professor Palik mentioned that he needed to leave for another meeting. So let me first go to one of the questions which is on the chat box, and this is for Professor Amina Mohsin. One of the younger colleagues wants to understand how women are concentrated in informal sector in the lower paying jobs with little social security. What are the steps or measures the Bangladesh government is taking to correct the gender segregation? Professor Amina.
Thank you, Dr. Sriradha. Do you want me to discuss the chapter as well?
A little bit, as whatever little time that we have, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me also take this opportunity to thank the editors and all of you for organizing this meeting. And I echo Professor Rahman Subhan's point that, this is a very good moment to celebrate the 50 years of Bangladesh. But, in the chapter, as I have pointed out, I have written it from a gender perspective. So, the person who has asked me the question, sorry, I don't know the name, but I would like to mention that since it is from a gender lens, my argument right from the beginning has been that both development and empowerment, these are two concepts which are problematic from a women's point of view. And I've tried to travel through the different terrains, like the political domain, the economic domain, the social, the personal domain, as well as the economic domain, of course, comes out very strongly. And I have also tried to point out that how urbanization itself is becoming a problem for women. And though I wrote it before the pandemic period, but in the pre-pandemic, much of what I had written earlier, I find that things have only exacerbated in the COVID period. That's why I said that, how the impacts are felt, these are different. If you look at the problem from a gender or an issue from a gender perspective. As for the question, what measures the government is taking about gender segregation are, and the Radha, can you repeat the question again? translated so fast.
I mean, there seems to be a gender segregation, and if Bangladesh is taking measures to basically address the fact that women are found in specific sectors, they're not there too much in the public domain area. I mean, the labor sector is a problem. So, I mean, the issue that you actually mentioned in your chapter, she actually is asking about that. Where you say that more reforms are required legally, socially. I remember your chapter talks about that.
Yes, my chapter talks about it. But the thing is that when you say that there is segregation, I mean, there is no such official policy of segregation. If you look in the constitution of Bangladesh, I mean, you will see that there is equality and it for men and women. And officially, there is no segregation. At the policy level, also, there is no segregation. And it's not only the NGOs, the government also has has attempted to mainstream women in all the sectors. I mean, it has been included in the 5-year plans also. And there is a push not only from the NGO sector, but also from if you look at the global level also, the SDG 5, it talks about empowerment of women as well as leaving no one behind. That is one of the major thrust of SDG 5. But what I was trying to argue was that because there are cultural factors, there are factors. I mean, I would try, when I'm saying cultural factors, I would want to bring in religion over here. In the Constitution, we continue to have the personal laws. And because of the personal laws, women continue to be, because personal laws, as I'm sure like what the audience over here is well aware of it, that it affects women's not only personal lives, but also it impacts upon the public lives as well. And with the growing rise of, I would say, rightist forces all over the world, it's not only peculiar to Bangladesh. You can see it happening in India, in Nepal, also in other countries. In Sri Lanka also, we can see the rise of the rightist forces all over the world. I mean, it is going to have its impact on women. And that is where the problem lies, that how one is going to face the challenge. I mean, and there I suggest that, we have to do away with the personal laws and women should get equal inheritance rights. And though we talk of much about the RMG sector and women's empowerment, but I've pointed out in my chapter, as well as we have seen it during the pandemic period. Ambassador Karim was talking about the new poor. Among this new poor, women constitute a significant portion because they were part of the RMG sector. And also the informal sector was part, which occupies almost about 70% of employment in Bangladesh. I mean, they never had any social safety measures. So this is one domain where women were quite dominant. So I would argue that these are sectors where government need to take social, safety measures, and women need to be visibilized more actively through government policies, as well as the NGOs have to think about it afresh. Thank you.
From Mohammad Masdur Rahman, who talks about why Bangladesh is unable to integrate in the global supply chain. I know Amitendu's left, but Mustafiz Bhai, do you want to take this on? He's saying why is it Vietnam and other Eastern countries, Bangladesh is unable to, be as attractive as others?
Yes, I think that this is a very important question because therein lies Bangladesh's competitive strength. I think one of the key reasons is that we haven't been able to, like Vietnam, attract foreign direct investment. So, for example, last year we had a foreign direct investment of about $3.5 billion, and Vietnam is 4 times more. And so that is one reason. Because if we have foreign direct investment, we can build up the backward linkages and the forward linkages. If which can strengthen our competitive power in the global market. And also the second point is that we haven't been able to really take advantage of the regional cooperation and integration. I think the production networks and the value chains can be developed by taking advantage of many of the current initiatives which are being taken. The BBIN vehicle agreement, the Indo-Bangladesh various initiatives. I think that is also another reason. But the other is that our own entrepreneurs will have to be interested in our in investing in Bangladesh. There's a lot of resources being taken out of the country. So improving business environment and investment climate is also key to developing the value chains through investment. So I think that this is where the next challenge for Bangladesh is. Thank you for that question.
Dr. Amit Ranjan, there's a question for you. Anurag is asking about how the issue of Rohingyas really, and he's actually pointing to the statement made by the foreign minister who says that failure to resolve the Rohingya issue may lead to radicalization and terrorism. And I know all of us on this particular forum are aware of the very deep significance of this continuation of this problem. Would you want to address this? How do you see the radicalization issue with Rohingyas taking place? I'm sorry, is he audible to everyone? I can't hear Amit much. No, Amit, just a minute. I don't think we can hear you clearly. You want to just refresh and come back or try again? No, there seems to be a problem with the audio. Can I just come back to you, Amit, in a few minutes in between? If you can, set this right, I'll come back to you again.
Yeah.
Amit, are you here? General Sani, I know you wanted to come in. Unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, I have. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Sri Radha?
Yes, yes, yes. Very clear. Very clear.
You can clear. Okay. Thank you so much. I think I just wanted to come in and compliment the authors, you and your this group of people who have put down a very researched and candid points. But I also want to bring in that as far as I talk about the bilateral relations, India and Bangladesh, especially in last about 5-6 years, we have reached a certain degree of comfort with each other, which probably not even imaginable about 20 years ago. And that itself is propelling this relationship. One is really, I have been to Bangladesh, but does get impressed by the sense of entrepreneurship, the hard work, and the way they are coming up. Of course, there are problems. And what I want to bring about is that both the countries, we should probably not over-concentrate on each other's internal politics. Because internal politics have their own dynamism. What we should do is we should concentrate and on the way we are developing as two economies in South Asia, which have places to reach. And the way we are cooperating with each other irrespective of the government which comes to power, this particular process should be given a push. And I find that being there. And I am talking as an army officer. And I want to tell you, if two armies of neighboring countries become comfortable with each other, and I can tell you that in South Asia, there are only two armed forces which are so comfortable with each other, we and Bangladesh, which is a very, very good sign. So I will not talk about the challenges. I will talk about the opportunities. And I feel that these opportunities must be taken, what do you call, advantage of. And I would also say there is a requirement of meeting each other more often, the young people meeting each other, because there is a lot of scope in this relationship. And that is what makes you very, very happy. Because I remember about 10, 15, 30 years ago, the image of Bangladesh was entirely different than what it is today. You see, you have made progress in the fields, which somehow I think should be emulated by whole of South Asia. And of course, India is a big country. I want to tell you that you should be very, very clear about one thing, that there is a soft corner for Bangladesh. There is hope in this relationship, and that must never be forgotten. Even when you are carrying out very analytical studies, you are talking about the differences, you are talking about. But I am an eternal optimist as far as the relationship with the Bangladeshis is concerned. That's what we should be the driving force as far as our two relations are concerned. Thank you so much.
Ambassador Shamsher Chaudhary.
Thank you very much. I'll be very, very brief and joining others in thanking Dr. Dr. Narayan and ISAS for the opportunity and for including me in the exercise. Now, I will just refer briefly to the chapter that I had written, which is the 5 years of Bangladesh, 50 years of Bangladesh-India relations. And the concluding paragraph, I had said that resorting to political rhetoric on both sides may serve narrow political gains in the short term, but in the long term, it will not create a climate of mutual trust and confidence, which is, I think, very important. So, what I wanted to say that every country has a sovereign right to make its own laws, amend its constitutions, whichever way. But when any country makes or amends the constitution, it is the total sovereign right of the government to do so. But if my country's name features in the discourse leading to the amendment, then how much it remains an internal matter becomes a major question. So I have not mentioned either the Citizenship Amendment Act or the NRC in the book as such, but there's an opaque reference to that. The second point is the chapter on Bangladeshi foreign policy that Dr. Sirada Dr. herself has written very well analyzed. Here I would like to add that I think in the broader context, I was in another forum the other day, that Japan has become as a major third player in a multipolar Asia. And I think Bangladesh's foreign policy also to fit that into the equation, not just look at BRI and or bilateral relations with India or confining to that, but in the broader Indo-Pacific strategy. I think Japan's role and the nature of Bangladesh's relations with Japan is should be a critical dialogue in the Bangladesh foreign policy. My third suggestion to everybody involved in the book, that every step should be taken to ensure that the book is widely available in Bangladesh, because it is about Bangladesh talking about our 50th anniversary. So I think we should do whatever is needed to make sure that the book is available in all the public and private universities, not necessarily as a textbook, but as a resource paper. I thank you all once again for I think putting together, I thought was a very good exercise. Narayan and Dr. Thank you.
Form a part of a section in the chapter, but more importantly, we tend to not focus on the kind of development that's being undertaken by Japan within Bangladesh, and constantly focus on China and take the narrative elsewhere. And I think it's, like you said in a different forum, and I also, while we speak at different forums, honestly saying that there are many more development partners who are doing incredible amount of work within Bangladesh, but somehow that kind of misses our radar. So I'm really glad you pointed that out. I have a couple of comments, which it's really not query here, but more of comments about the state of economic crisis and the national policies. Amit, can you come in here? There's also a question about Hizbut Tahrir and Tahrir, and maybe you could talk about Rohingyas and Hizbut, the query that's here. Amit, can you hear us now? Dr. Amit Ranjan's in Singapore. He's an ISAS scholar, and he's written this absolutely wonderful piece on militancy. Dr. Amit Ranjan? Can anybody spot him? I'm unable to see him actually on my window.
Actually, I can't find him. Maybe he's.
You can't find him. I think he had a connection issue.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else who would? We'll see if he comes back. We'll hold back these two questions about Hizbut, and otherwise one of us from the panel can also answer that. Anybody else who wants to intervene? I can see a lot of friends from Bangladesh who are here. Mr. Khondkar, would you want to come in? I just wanted to say, though, we had planned to close it at 1 o'clock, but we'll extend it because I can see some of our friends who are already here but who hasn't commented. We'll certainly close it at 1:15 sharp because Dr. Narayan needs to leave for another meeting. So another few minutes, Mr. Habib Khondkar, if you want to come in. I think everybody is facing a bit of connectivity issues. I can see him, but Mr. Khondkar, can you hear us?
I think he just left the room. Maybe he'll be back in a minute.
Okay.
Sridhar, can I briefly comment on the Rohingya issue and this impact?
Sure, why not? Please, even on the Hizbut Tahrir, I know you follow it
I
closely.
want to focus on that. You see, in November 2015, I had written an article in Daily Star on the Rohingya crisis, and the whole world was going gaga about Aung San Suu Kyi and the emergence of democracy in Myanmar. I had said if she does not address the Rohingya issue, there'll be a multiple kinds of problems. And one of the things I highlighted in that article that these youth of the Rohingya who have been victims of scorned at home and enfranchised, abused and ignored, marginalized, now thrown out of the country. These will be easy recruits for the extremists and radicals who don't have recognized any frontiers anymore. They will be, and this may already be happening under the radar. So the need for addressing the Rohingya issues in one form or the other, I know China has a much bigger role to play here. And frankly, I have said this in many forums, China has come up short and below our expectations. People also, India had a role to play also. And again, there is some frustration there. But I think China has a much bigger role here to play. Because if radicalization evolves in the Rohingya camps, among the youth especially, it will not impact on Bangladesh alone or Myanmar alone. It will impact on the region and perhaps go beyond that. So that is the real big danger of the Rohingya crisis. Not so much the economy or the social, but it is the possibility of this becoming a major source of radicalization for the whole region. That is what I wanted to highlight there.
Is there anybody else who wants to come in here?
Dr. Habib Khondkar is back.
Yes. Dr. Habib.
Hi. Thank you so much. I'm so discussion very much.
You're echoing a lot. You need to unmute.
I think he's trying to relog in.
Thank you so much. I mean, it was a real pleasure listening to all these, very important comments that were made, especially from Professor Raymond Sovan, and Ambassador Tariq Karim, and all the participants. I really congratulate you on such a brilliant project. Thank you very much.
Anybody else here? I'm sorry, I can't see any. Dr. Khonkar, sorry. I mean, I didn't want to cut you off, but.
No. I just wanted to thank you and congratulate
Okay,
you.
all right. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for your presence. I just thought I saw another friend from Bangladesh, Dr. Islam.
Hello, this is Shoaib Islam. I am an ISAS alumni, currently doing PhD in China. So I have a question for Professor Raymond Sovan. My question is, you see, for the first, since 1990, the kind of politics we have seen in Bangladesh, it has changed in the last 10 years or so. But no matter what kind of political system put in place, it apparently doesn't affect economic growth that much. So how do you see this disconnect? Thank you.
Professor Shobhan?
Argue in my forward that actually what they call the Bangladesh paradox is not so much a paradox, because we have got a whole range of drivers of growth which I have identified. In fact, I had left out one more in my list, which was the remarkable contribution of our migrants. Now, I think the significant feature of the Bangladesh relationship between state and society is that the state has managed to create enough space and autonomy for the drivers of growth to, in fact, actually go on doing whatever they are doing. I think in many countries where you have drivers of growth, these tend to get frustrated because of their conflicts, which in fact are created for them by the state. But in Bangladesh, however the state is functioning, we have still managed to create the autonomy for each of these drivers to, in fact, go on performing. So that whether it's NGOs, whether it's microcredit, whether it's entrepreneurs, whether it's migrants, they keep growing. What can be said over here is that the government could do a great deal more to, in fact, facilitate them. I mean, we are already every day for the last 4 or 5 days in Bangladesh seeing the desperate plight of Saudi Arabian migrants. About 50,000 of them are stuck here with their work permits expiring because no effective arrangements could have been made to, in fact, actually get enough flights going and enough testing arrangements made for the COVID to see that these people can take off on time. And you see this sort of drama played out twice a year on Eid and Bakrid, about thousands of people struggling to, in fact, get onto trains in order to sort of get home. So essentially, these are particular areas where the state can play a much more effective role, but there seems to be some sort of built-in dysfunction, both in the way the state functions, as also, in fact, in the monetization of virtually every transaction in which the state is actually involved over here. But the remarkable achievement is that in spite of this, people are willing to pay the extra rents in order to avail of the opportunities which are there for them, and they continue to do so. We need much deeper analysis to explore how these two co-relationships can, how these relationships can coexist and Bangladesh can keep growing. But what I have pointed out not once but 100 times is that Bangladesh could really take off for the stars if in fact you had a much more effective state being much more strongly supportive, much less restrictive in the way in which your more dynamic elements are, in fact, actually carrying out their entrepreneurial challenges, and you give them the necessary political representation. It's quite remarkable that apart from the garment owners who seem to have got a monopoly of our parliament, virtually all the other dynamic elements, both workers, migrants, have barely any representation in parliament. And so there is no one to really sort of speak for them. And this again is a weakness of our democratic process, which demands correction because it is very relevant to the way in which we, in fact, move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I hand over to Dr. Narayan, who's going to sum up in the query, there's also, I'll just reply very briefly to one query here. I can't see the name, by Anish Mishra, who's asking whether it can be argued that the seeds of authoritarianism were sowed in Bangladesh between 1971 to 1975. A simple reply would be yes. But I would actually say, I mean, this really requires a much larger amplification. And I would, my earlier work on Bangladesh, which I called Fragile Democracy, actually highlights these issues. And I think that that whole fragile democracy continues. While many authors and many, have called it hybrid regime, but of course, I think the point that Professor Shoban has been making from the very beginning that it's a serious issue here about how leaders have inputted and taken up powers, and that has led to severe misgovernance. And I think the point that Salahuddin Ahmed also made as to how that's reflected in both financial and other monetary sectors. So it's actually an issue which kind of puts a huge canvas over all other aspects of Bangladesh and how it's been run, or it's some remarkable achievements, yes, but something that they also need to address and to rein into, in fact, sustain the growth and grow from it. And I think these are much larger issues, and I'm sorry, I don't think I can answer that quickly in a time that we have just now. Over to you, Dr. Narayan. I think we need to close, and I know you need to leave. There was a short question about how does the economy, I mean, how do you see Bangladesh's economy doing in the post-COVID? I think somebody did touch on it lightly, but maybe you want to address that and sum up this proceedings for today. Thank you, Dr. Narayan.
Thank you very much, Sriradha. At the outset, I must tell everybody how fortunate that ISAS and I have been in having Sriradha in this entire journey, because she has reached out to all her friends, colleagues, academics, and her network to bring in contributions which are absolutely stellar from the top of the academic as well as the, I would say, policy spectrum. So I would say start with thanking Sriradha and thank you all the authors, especially authors who have come in from Bangladesh to openly talked about the successes as well as the certain limitations that they see. So thank you, and of course, Professor Rahman Soban for honoring us with his forward. It's very obvious that that post-COVID, particularly this 2020, is actually going to start a slightly different story than what has been narrated in the book, because the book talks about a uniform growth of opportunities which are going to open up, of global growth, etc. But when we look at it from in September 2020, things appear to be terribly different. Terribly different primarily because remittances are coming down, because employment is going down, and most importantly, because I think the government, and I talk of perhaps all South Asian governments, perhaps with the exception of, I would say, limited to Sri Lanka, all governments have not yet got on to the task of what to do with the huge unemployment or unemployed labor that they will have in their hands when once this epidemic runs its course. What are going to be the employment opportunities? And this is going to impact Bangladesh significantly, especially because these remittances and these overseas workers were actually contributing to the improvements in the rural economy. So if you do have a system where concentration of, I mean, there's a mention of the Gini coefficient getting much worse. If you do have a system where power as well as incomes and wealth is going to be concentrated in the hands of the few, and that a large percentage of people are going to be more and more disempowered. So I do think that we have a quite a concern going ahead, and certainly one would expect a lot of confidence building measures, when I would say fiscal and monetary measures, and particularly a lot of infrastructure spending to happen to bring back demand, to bring back employment, to bring back incomes, and to assure livelihoods, distribution, especially of basic livelihood concerns, it becomes very, very important. I don't even know whether the Bangladesh government is thinking about these things, but these would be, I would put, primarily important items in the agenda. And I'd go back to say that energy as well as climate change, which we have not been able to talk about because of the I would say lack of space in the book. There are some areas we have not just been not able to cover. But these are two issues which are going to be of major concern to Bangladesh in the future. Once again, I just want to say thank you all very, very much. And thank you, Sri Radha, and thank